The 1990s was a defining decade for popular music. Trends and technology that would come to dominate the industry emerged then, and DJ and musician Moby was a part of it all. He chronicles that raucous, anxious, and alcohol-fueled era of his life in his new memoir. It's called Porcelain. And Richard Melville Hall, better known by his stage name Moby, joins us now for more. It's a great pleasure to meet you.
Well, thanks. Nice to meet you as well.
The first question I think should be, what do I call you?
It's a good question. So I was born Richard Melville Hall because I'm related to Herman Melville. And my parents had a sense of humor. And right after I was born, they looked at me and I was this tiny little white grub of a baby. And my dad thought that Richard Melville Hall was too grown up of a name for a tiny little white grub of a baby. So as a joke, he started calling me Moby. And now I'm 50 years old and I'm still known by my infant joke nickname.
It feels weird, though, for me to call you Moby. Like in the same way, if Bono were here, I'd want to call him Paul, or if Sting were here, I'd want to call him Gordon.
But if you call me Richard, I get very confused. Because technically, that's the name on my passport and my driver's license, but I've never been called Richard. And I have a stepfather who I adore, and his name is Richard. So whenever anyone calls me Richard, I look over my shoulder to see if my stepfather is there.
Moby it is. I can do that. I can do that. Moby, I want to start by reading you something Salman Rushdie wrote about your new book. He wrote the following. 10 years of Moby's life, mostly in the decrepit, dangerous, much-loved New York City of the 1990s, a life comically overcrowded, filthy, alcohol-fueled, vegan, unbelievably noisy, full of spit and semen and some sort of Christianity, and often suddenly moving. The writing is terrific, enlivened by a bewildered, deadpan humor that makes crazy sense of it all. His ancestor, Herman Melville, would, I think, be simultaneously revolted and proud. What do you think of that?
I have to say, when I got my final copy of the book, and it's because it's my first book, and I couldn't believe it. I was like, this is a real book. This isn't like
and you wrote
tiny,
it.
And I wrote it, for better or worse. And I immediately looked at the pictures, and I was like, wow, these are real pictures. And then I looked at the back, and I saw the list of blurbs that we had, and I knew they were coming, but I couldn't believe them. This is my first book, and I'm a musician, and I have Salman Rushdie and Dave Eggers and Susan Orlean and Paul Haggis and Jonathan Ames. I mean, these are real writers. And I'm still a little stunned that Salman Rushdie, arguably the most esteemed writer of our generation, would deign to write a blurb for my weird little book.
And yet, he thinks you're a pretty good writer.
Which is very charitable.
Well, let's get into that. Well, I mean, beyond wanting to make your great-great-great-uncle Herman proud?
I like to say great-great-great-grand-uncle, but it might be a couple more greats.
Okay.
I have no idea.
So why write this?
It's a good question, because when I was growing up, autobiographies and memoirs were written by very old former politicians or athletes. They certainly weren't written by 50-year-old musicians who'd never been a head of state. But then, I guess about 10 or 12 years ago, people started writing what I would think of as like discrete, temporally contextual memoirs. Like Patti Smith wrote a great memoir called Just Kids, that it's about her, but it's also very much about being a young artist at a specific time in a specific place. And so I sort of see this as being in that, roughly in line with that. So it's about me, but it's also about a young artist in New York when New York was this gang-riddled, crack-addled, very dysfunctional place.
Yeah, we forget. I mean, New York is Disneyland today, but once upon a time, it was a really different place.
Yeah, I mean,
and you were right you had a front row seat for all of that.
You couldn't be in New York in the late 80s and early 90s and not just see how dysfunctional and decrepit it was. But at the same time, it was dysfunctional, it was filthy, it was dangerous, but for an artist, for a musician, it was paradise.
And it gave you your start.
And it did provide like this odd, filthy urban incubator, almost like a crucible in which strange art could get made.
So let's compare the process of writing songs to writing a book. Similarities, differences?
The similarities, well, in this case, they're both written by me. They're both written on Apple computers. And I guess there's a similar goal behind writing a song and a book, which is to try and communicate subjective truth and emotion. You know, it's just, you can cheat way more with a song. You know, like
cheat? What do you mean?
Meaning, with a song, you write the chorus and you can repeat the chorus. You know, with this, if you write a paragraph, you can't just keep repeating. Like if you say, wow, what a great paragraph, let's just copy and paste it a few times. You can't do that with a book. Like each word has to really be labored over and thought about. Whereas with a song, you can be a lot more sort of impetuous and spontaneous, and you sort of are documenting that spontaneous process. Whereas with this, it's just, there's a lot more meticulous labor involved.
Well, and a song is a few minutes long at the end of a day, and this is 400 pages, and you are, I have to tell you, for a guy who's I mean, I've had the misfortune of writing 7 books, and this is your first, and I know how hard it is to write a book. You are a really good writer. I mean, you've got an eye. No, you've got an eye. I'm not blowing smoke up here. You know what here? You've got an eye for detail, and for telling a great story. And sometimes I'm reading this and I'm thinking he's chronicling a place and a time, and it's actually about you. Did you know you could do that before you did it?
I didn't. In fact, originally I wanted someone else to write the book for me, because a lot of public figures, as we know, will hire someone to write the book for them. And you'll see, like, you know, the public figure's name on the cover and then the ghostwriter very small on the title page. And I wanted to do that, and then my editor said, you know, you're descended from Herman Melville. It would actually be a hereditary affront to not write your own book. And but then I thought, okay, before writing the book, let me read other memoirs and see what other people have done well and what other people have done badly.
So who did what well that you liked?
Well, I don't want to name names because I don't want to get in trouble.
Okay. You won't get in trouble saying who did what well.
Okay, who did what well? Yeah, you're right. So John Cheever, one of my favorite American authors, he wrote his journals, and they're so honest and they're so engaging and so emotionally revealing that I thought, at the very least, I want to aspire to do that. You know, I wanted a level of honesty and almost what I would consider like anecdotal generosity. You know, like I wanted each chapter to sort of stand up as an entertaining anecdote. So that way, even if someone doesn't like me, or if someone has no interest in me or what my life has been, at least there's something hopefully a little revelatory and honest and entertaining.
I wouldn't say a little, I'd say a lot. Let's go back, I want to go back 40 years now. This is March 1976, sitting in your mom's car in a laundromat parking lot, Stratford, Connecticut. Not Stratford, Ontario, which is 2.5 hours west of here, but Stratford, Connecticut. And Mr. Director, sir, shall we play this song that came over the radio? Roll it, please.
If there's a cure for this, I don't want it. I don't want it. If there's a cure for this, I don't want it. I don't want it. Think about it all the time. Thinking only makes me smile and say.
The great Diana Ross, Love Hangover. What did that song mean to you at the time?
So basically, I grew up very, very poor in a very affluent suburb. My mother and I were on food stamps, we were on welfare, we had to borrow money to buy food.
You should remind people, your father died when you were 2,
When I was 2, yeah. And
So you never knew your dad?
I mean, I don't remember knowing him. He died, I think, right around the time I turned 2 years old. And one way that my mom and I made extra money was by doing the neighbor's laundry. So I remember this, the book sort of starts with this. I'm in the car, it's raining, it's March, and I'm sure almost everyone watching has had this experience of like being in a depressing place in March when it's raining. You know, so you take the depressing place and you add rain and poverty and it just becomes super depressing. So I'm sitting in the car, my mom is inside the laundromat smoking cigarettes and folding clothes, and I'm spinning the radio dial because I was obsessed with anything that sort of provided me with a window to a world that was not suburban poverty. And I heard that song, the Diana Ross song, Love Hangover, and first and foremost, it scared me a little bit because it was about, I knew it was about sex. And I was 8 or 9 years old, and sex was a weird, scary thing that you didn't want to think about. But it also sounded futuristic. And I had been obsessed with all things futuristic and science fiction. And it somehow made me realize there's a world beyond this world of sad suburban poverty.
So it planted a seed, maybe a musical seed for you.
It almost like encoded itself into my DNA, musical and otherwise, and just let me know that there was more. And it seemed like a good way to start the book, because in some ways that was kind of the beginning of my odd musical journey.
But then you made, I guess, what's a very interesting decision to only tell 10 years' story of your life, 1989 to 1999. And in fact, you actually don't in the book talk about the biggest success of your life. You stop before you get there. Now, I guess there's a sequel coming, but how come? Why that decade?
Well, partially because my experience from 89 to 99 was certainly odd and fairly unique. You know, in 1989, I was a sober Christian living in an abandoned factory in a crack neighborhood, and I was trying to get a record deal and trying to get a DJing job.
You do have a sense of humor about that now, right? As you look back on that?
I think it's pretty funny, yeah.
Yes, yes.
And then I moved to New York, got my first record deal, and this was, as we were saying, like crack-addicted, damaged New York. And so I would be DJing at sex clubs, I'd be DJing at raves, DJing at nightclubs, and then teaching Bible study during the day. And then halfway through the book, I go to this other extreme of drinking, and I'm no longer a Christian, and I'm dating really questionable people. And I thought this was an interesting story. Whereas the second story, like say 1999 to 2009, my life was much more cliched. I became a successful musician. I became even more narcissistic and entitled. I drank more. I did too many drugs. I battled anxiety. And it's just, that story has been told by a lot of different people. So if I'm going to tell that second story, I just have to figure out a way to tell it in a unique way.
Did you think, though, when you were going through that decade in particular, as it was starting to happen for you, right? I mean, $100 a night for a job, $20 a night for a job, and then eventually you start to pick on. You know, you kind of did lead the life that so many people out there want to lead. Sex, drugs, rock and roll. Did you not think that you'd, like, rolled snake eyes when you did that?
I feel like a lot of other people, like when I read Motley Crue, The Dirt, you know, it's written by Neil Strauss, their memoir. It seemed like when they were indulging in sex, drugs, and rock and roll, they enjoyed it a lot more than I did. Like I was coming at it from almost this, I don't know, self-negating.
Well, you felt guilty
Calvinist.
about it.
I felt guilty, and I just could never fully immerse myself in it. So I certainly drank a lot, and I certainly did a lot of drugs and stayed out late, but I never fully felt engaged in it in the way I think other people did. So
There's that story in the book about how you're with this woman and you somehow summon up the courage not to have sex with her, but then by the morning you both relent and you do, and you sit there spooning, I guess lie there spooning, asking each other whether you're going to hell as a result?
yeah, that's early on in the book when I was a very serious Christian. I had a very serious Christian girlfriend, and we tried to resist temptation. And we were 22, but we were really trying to be good Christians and trying not to sleep with each other. But occasionally we would succumb and have sex and immediately pray for forgiveness afterwards. And I'm quoting myself, which feels weird, but there's this one quote in there I like where I say, when it came to sex, I was convinced that I was both doing it wrong and making God mad at the same time.
See what I mean? You're a good writer. What do you do now, Moby?
I lead a wonderfully cliched Los Angeles existence. I go hiking, I'm a vegan, I do yoga, I'm sober, I even meditate. But I sort of feel like it's a much more benign cliche than the cliche that I was in New York in the 2000s, where I was hungover and entitled and just anxious the whole time.
You ever met Woody Allen?
I have once. I saw Woody Allen once on the street, and it's very exciting because I love most of Woody Allen's movies, especially the early ones. But someone once did describe me as being like the Woody Allen of techno, and I thought that was, I mean, it's very aspirational for me because he made Annie Hall and Manhattan and Stardust Memories. I haven't approached what he's done creatively, but certainly in terms of like neuroses and hair loss, he and I have a lot in common.
And changing the name too.
Yeah.
He's Alan Konigsberg. But the reason I ask is because New York is fundamental to his DNA, and it was to yours for a long time. You've turned your back on it now. You've gone to LA, and I just wondered whether you ever had a conversation with him about him asking you, how could you do that?
I still haven't met Woody Allen, and I almost think sometimes it's better to not meet your heroes. Like, I don't know if you've had this experience. So recently I was at a party and Neil Young was there.
Great Canadian.
And I love Neil Young, a great Canadian. 10 of my favorite songs of all time are Neil Young songs. And someone said to me, oh, Neil Young is in that other room. Do you want to meet him? And I said, no, I don't. Because I'm sure he's a very nice man. And I'm sure if I had met him, he would have been very gracious and polite. But what if I'd caught him on a bad day? And what if he'd been mean to me? In 2 seconds, I would have lost 10 of my favorite songs of all time. So I would rather just like not meet my heroes and keep their art, sort of unsullied and untainted by actual personal encounter.
I totally get that. I wonder where you have this very deep interest now in making sure that animals are not abused. You're a vegan, as you pointed out. Do you know where that came from?
I do. At least I think I do. When I was very, very young, I was living in a basement apartment in Harlem with my parents. This is before my dad died. And I'm sort of just I'm guessing here. My parents fought a lot. They're both battling some mental issues and some substance abuse. And I know that they fought quite a lot. But we also had a dog, a cat, and 3 lab rats in the apartment. And the first photograph of me when I was maybe 10 days old, I'm in a little baby bath with a dog, a cat, and these lab rats just watching very calmly. So I think at an early age, it's almost like the idea of limbic attunement, where I looked at the people who were screaming and yelling and smoking cigarettes and realized, oh, people are scary, and people cannot be trusted. But I looked at these animals and they were benign and calm. And I think somewhere in my sort of developmental brain decided animals are trustworthy and animals are safe.
So you're going to bat for them now.
So it's sort of my life's work, meaning like I love writing books, I love making music, but working on issues of animal welfare, that's actually my job.
And you've worked with another Canadian on that, Pamela Anderson.
Pamela is an amazing activist. I had no idea, because there are a lot of, I'm sure you've encountered this as well, there are a lot of people in different avenues of activism who are dilettantes. There are actually PR people who will work with movie stars and tell them what activism they should do to help their career, which is a little bit creepy.
A little cynical, yeah.
And when I first met Pamela, I thought she was going to be a sort of dilettante animal activist, but she's committed. She travels around the world doing animal activism. She's met with Vladimir Putin to talk about animal activism. I believe, she's certainly on the board of Sea Shepherd and a bunch of other organizations. I have to say, I'm very impressed with the depths and level of her activism.
So what are your goals in that regard for animal welfare?
Okay, and I have to give you a slightly truncated answer because it's way too easy for me to speak far too lengthily at this. But first of all, my goal is pretty simple, is to end subsidization for animal agriculture. Because animal agriculture causes 51% of climate change, 90% of rainforest deforestation, 75% of antibiotic resistance, roughly 100% of famine, at least 50% of heart disease, diabetes, cancer, and obesity. So animal agriculture is killing us, and we subsidize it. Globally, I think they're spending around $2 or $3 trillion a year subsidizing directly and indirectly animal agriculture. And I'm not even saying people should or shouldn't eat dairy or eat meat. I'm saying that we should stop subsidizing an industry that is killing us. So that's professionally, not as a writer or a musician, that's my goal.
Let me finish up on a bit of an odd question here, which is, I knew music was your thing. You've done great things in music. I now know you can write well. You have this new mission in life that is really, quite important. What are you lousy at, Moby?
What I'm lousy at? Hair care, clearly.
Yes.
Let me think. not very good at basketball.
Right, okay.
Trying to think, these are sort of inherent limitations, though. What am I bad at? I mean, I'm sure that there are lots of things, but in my kind of solipsistic, delusional way, I just can't think of what they are right now.
Solipsistic. I cannot remember the last time somebody who was a musician used that word on this
I
program.
was a philosophy major before I started
Awesome.
making records. So.
That is awesome. It's a great pleasure to meet you.
Well, thanks. Nice meeting
Thanks
you
for
as well.
sparing some time for us today. Porcelain, a memoir, and just the first of more to come, I'm sure. Moby, thanks so much.
Thanks.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.